At the end of the day, what I'm focused on is making sure that everybody has access to the data that they need and that they are using the data in the correct way and understand how the data is structured so that they are able to kind of like self build reports and understand why this number looks different here versus there.
Of Go-to-Market Excellence. I'm Dan Quirk, and our guest today is Kelsey Cohen. She's Senior Manager of Revenue Operations at PetDesk, the #1 mobile app and communication software for pet care providers. Before this, Kelsey was Chief of Staff at Bloomscape. She got her career started actually in marketing and got her degree in fine arts. What a cool background. Kelsey, thank you so much for joining the show today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
So when we first met, Kelsey, you told me that RevOps leaders should stop trying to get everyone out of spreadsheets. But then you also said, on the other hand, people need to also be clear about where the sources of truth are. Those two things kind of seemed contradictory to me, and so I wanted to hear a little bit more about why you believe that.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like you're putting me on the spot right off the bat. I kind of like it. So in my experience, I've primarily worked with startups that are kind of either early stage or kind of ramping up, Series C, Series B, that kind of time in their lifespan. And usually at that point, there really isn't a BI tool, or if there's a BI tool, it's been kind of hacked together. There's a lot of different systems that the company is using, and data inconsistencies and data governance are a big issue. That was the case when I joined PetDesk. I was tasked with kind of like figuring out how to clean up the data across multiple of systems so there can be single sources of truth. But when I say but I also believe that you need to make data accessible, and I am on a personal mission to try to figure out how to like democratize data and help everybody develop a stronger data acumen throughout the company. And that starts with kind of meeting people where they are. So yes, it would be wonderful if right off the bat we could spend, 12 months standing up an amazing BI tool and then spend another 6 months trying to train people how to use the BI tool. But at the end of the day, what I'm focused on is making sure that everybody has access to the data that they need and that they are using the data in the correct way and understand how the data is structured so that they are able to kind of like self-build reports and understand why this number looks different here versus there. And in my experience, that's meant a lot of bringing data into like a Google Sheet. And there's some really clever tools out there that actually allow you to connect data sources. So for us at PetDesk, that's Salesforce primarily, but also Zora and HubSpot. So we can work on, the RevOps team can really work on delineating source of truth, adding some logic to it, but we can bring it into a spreadsheet where people are going to be a little bit more comfortable.
Okay, so you mentioned a couple of data integrity issues that you've experienced at early stages. When you came into PetDesk, what were some of the top issues that they were dealing with, and what were the first data integrity challenges you were brought in to tackle?
So at PetDesk, it's kind of a unique situation. So they had been tracking a lot of data for a very long time, but they had been doing that in a multitude of different areas. There wasn't a real clear understanding of like establishing sources of truth for what types of data. I'm of the belief that like you should follow the origination path. So if it originates in a system, that system should be the source of truth. And they had also gone through a bunch of different system migrations and kind of upgrades, which of course then became a game of telephone for trying to capture all their historical data. So historical data was a big issue. So trying to go back and figure out how to clean all of that up and structure it in a way that we can track over time and have kind of like a timestamp of change month over month, but also accurate views of holistically where are we today as a company. And then along with that, they had never really used Salesforce or a CRM of that magnitude before. They had been using HubSpot, and when they implemented Salesforce, it was a little bit haphazard and a little bit messy. They did the best that they could, and they spent about a year cleaning that up before I got here.
What were some of the haphazard things that you noticed in the way that Salesforce was configured?
A lot of what you kind of expect for someone for a company that's never really worked out of a CRM like that and was working primarily with consultants without really having someone in-house who knew both the people processes, the business processes, and could understand how to translate that in the system. So there was a lot of just trying to rebuild what they had already done in HubSpot, but those are two vastly different tools, and they kind of had to play catch up afterwards to figure out, okay, the data is structured differently in Salesforce. We need to be able to report on things at a different level. We need to have different types of processes for this type of system, and a lot of that came with iterations within the tool, which is hard to do on some level, but is also kind of expected. So when I came in, I really wanted to get a grasp on where are the sort of like data hygiene issues. A lot of that was just changing the way that we captured like cancellations and changing the way that we captured upgrades 6 months ago and things like that. So trying to get all of that kind of apples to apples and making sure that the data was aligned there. And then figuring out places where we needed to add in time stamping to understand kind of historical changes over time. And then now I'm really kind of getting into the juicier bits, which are how do we start to make the data that we have more actionable? So how do we use customer data to help understand churn risk? How do we use the prospect data that we have to help strengthen our demand gen strategies and like personalization at scale as far as communication? How do we take some of the information that we can glean from content engagement and website engagement and translate that into kind of sales notes and pass that back to the sales team? So I'm kind of in the more fun part of the data hygiene now, but there is still always kind of that ongoing cleanup work just because we have gone through so many system changes.
Yeah, I mean, the data hygiene stuff never stops, right? Because there's always humans using these systems, and we rely so much on them to enter data, and humans sometimes make errors, maybe more than sometimes, and also the system integrations sometimes break too.
Yeah.
But so you've obviously experienced these things at Series A, Series B level companies. One of the things we've noticed is that, and I'm sure you experienced this having a background in marketing, is you end up, with the purchasing power of technology has kind of like gotten decentralized. So marketing leaders or marketing or sales leaders or practitioners can actually, over the last 10 or 15 years, they're the ones buying the software, like tools like HubSpot. You buy them and you just implement them. So the same person is researching, purchasing, implementing, and using the software. And oftentimes what this resulted in is poor data infrastructure from the outset.
Yep.
And that's what kind of drove a lot of the data hygiene issues. And it almost seems like with the RevOps revolution we're in now, we're kind of like solving this, and we're getting back to the basics of what you've been talking about, people processes, business processes, and then layering on the technology. So curious your take on that and other challenges in ops that you've noticed as you guys have transitioned out of startup mode and at PetDesk.
Yeah, so I mean, I think you bring up a really good point. I think the sort of wave of RevOps and kind of centralizing the systems and the data and the processes into a single team has really been needed and has been really beneficial here at PetDesk, because RevOps is like an agnostic team, right? So we report directly. I report directly into our CEO, and I work with the customer facing teams, but I am not on the customer facing teams. So I can kind of stay above some of the like who gets credit for the sale kind of conversation and help focus the conversation more around what do we need from the business, how do we measure what's right for the business, and what are the true kind of like levers and drivers that we should be looking at to achieve our overall strategy and goals, not just on the team level. And then also I having it centrally located means that we are able to have a better understanding of the full funnel kind of ecosystem. And I think that spans the actual tools that we're using, as well as the data that's coming in and out of those tools, and the processes that support and impact and are needed from those tools. And being able to kind of have that bird's eye view has really allowed me to make decisions and kind of drive conversations around not just what does this one team need, because of course there are going to be tools that are just siloed within marketing or just for a sales team, but really making sure that everybody kind of understands what information is available from those tools, how they're being used, and how they could potentially impact something on another team. And, you know, we have kind of a North Star of alignment, and nothing should impede something else. So it's really about making sure that a system, a process, a data change that's happening in HubSpot, which is our MA platform, isn't going to impact something adversely within like our CS tool, right? And being kind of above and agnostic again allows me to drive those conversations from a more holistic company perspective.
I did notice you're hiring a marketing operations person. Is that somebody you've already have in seat? And I'm curious, like, so you're talking about this, you mentioned bird's eye view, centrally located, you're reporting to the CEO, you obviously, you're kind of like an unbiased person who just wants what's best for the business throughout the entire funnel. You want to optimize the whole thing. You're hiring a marketing ops person. Are they going to be reporting to you? And how do you, so I guess my question is, why wouldn't they just be another RevOps person? Why, and how are you going to avoid like them being kind of like in a marketing silo? And because here's why I ask, because I think RevOps as a central role is critical. But then if you start having CS ops, sales ops, marketing ops, then all of a sudden you're separating and segmenting, and then people have their own teams that they're supporting, and they're not that neutral party, perhaps, at some companies. So how are you going to avoid that? And tell me about the thinking behind hiring a marketing ops person and all that.
Yeah, so when I got to PetDesk, RevOps didn't exist before. So I was sort of given the opportunity to try to figure out what it should look like here, which was really exciting, but
That's awesome.
Yeah, and there's like so many different ways that companies are leveraging RevOps and structuring those teams. And it's either distributed, so it's sort of like you'll have a RevOps person and maybe a RevOps person with a RevOps analyst or something like that. That's central, and then they're working with distributed operational team members that are vertically like located within marketing, CS, and sales. Sometimes it's a hybrid. Sometimes it's all centrally located. And we went back and forth for many, many weeks on trying to figure out what was the right thing for PetDesk now, but also what does it need to look like in the future. And because I was so new, and a lot of the people that were on my team, or that not on my team, but who I was working with originally, had been at the company for 4 or 5 years, I didn't really want to come in and just jump in and say, this is how we should be doing things here, because I didn't know yet. So I tried to give it some time to figure out what was going to make sense for the company now, and then how do we get to where it needs to be in the future. And what that ended up being is a central team. And we've been sort of kind of phasing that build out of that structure over the last few months. So my vision is that myself would be leading the team, but as a player coach, because I think a lot of RevOps professionals and RevOps leaders still like to be in the systems and still like to be in the data and like to be able to have those kind of like, what's the right decision to do this strategically? How do we do this the right way? And I'm definitely one of those people. So I definitely consider myself kind of a player coach in that way. And then having like a horizontal team that is dedicated to supporting the full funnel, probably mostly from a data perspective. So a really strong like data analyst who can help support all the needs across the company, help with like board reporting, executive level reporting, and full system, like full ecosystem governance. And then, of course, be kind of the SME as far as working with what I'm calling like my vertically embedded team members that are sitting with their vertical teams. So like CS, we have a CS ops manager who just moved over from another team internally, and then we just hired our marketing ops manager, and eventually we'll be hiring a sales ops manager too. And they will be reporting to me, so they'll be centrally aligned, but very deeply embedded. Because what I'm trying to avoid is RevOps just becoming like IT and just a bunch of like support tickets and questions and like, hey, can you just go do this for us? But really have those vertical roles be part of the teams that they're supporting, so they really become the expert on the ins and outs of the process, the ins and outs of the needs of that team. They're advocating when we're having like RevOps central kind of like full funnel conversations. Those are the ones who are advocating for like, hey, wait, don't forget customer success really needs to be involved in that conversation early. Or demand gen is actually doing this really cool thing over here. I think the AEs could benefit from it, or, all that kind of conversation and advocacy happens sort of centrally. And then as they're distributed and kind of working within the teams and joining team meetings and joining stand-ups and campaign planning and all of that, they are also sort of the operational representative there who is primarily asking a lot of the hard questions, right? I think ops people tend to think a few steps ahead and are kind of always proactively aware of red flags or roadblocks or concerns or like restraints that nobody else is thinking about, and usually maybe they're thinking about but don't know how to ask the question correctly or feel silly asking it. And what I keep on telling like my CS ops and my marketing ops people is that I want them to be that like noisy duck. I want them to be my representative when I can't be in every meeting, saying, hey, wait, did we think about this? I think before we make a decision here, we need to make sure that this person over here is brought into the conversation. Or I know you really want to do that, but the amount of work it's going to take is probably like not worth it. Or there's nothing in the world that actually does what you want to do. We need to simplify, like kind of asking those types of questions to help drive the conversation forward. And it's going to be a bit of an experiment, to be honest. But I've spent the last 6 months at PetDesk really trying to build strong relationships with the leaders of the leaders and the managers of the teams that we're supporting. And I think because we are aligned, it's going to enable the ICs to kind of work together and be collaborative in the way that I'm hoping that we'll be able to.
Yeah, I'm curious. So this is your first role running a RevOps team. I know you were previously chief of staff. So just curious where you go for like. Who do you bounce ideas off? Where do you go to learn about how to build a RevOps function? Because it sounds like you said you're a player coach, you're learning on the job and things like that. Where do you go for to learn how to be better, to build a better team?
Yeah, I mean, it's less about, I think, figuring out RevOps, and I think it's more about how to effectively work like cross-functionally. And I have like I'm actually part of a local kind of like women in tech and women's leadership network that's been really great and supportive to bounce ideas off of. And then the other stuff, honestly, a lot of it came from marketing, because like my marketing background and the people that I met there, because marketers juggle a lot, right? They tend to have larger teams that have a lot of very distinct roles on them, without a lot of overlap. And you kind of have to you need to be creative, you need to be technical, you need to understand data, you need to understand customers, you have to be able to communicate internally and externally and figure out how to manage a lot of different types of people in a lot of different types of roles. And I think that experience and the kind of like marketing mentors that I've worked with have really helped me figure out how to sort of translate that into like an operational approach, because there's some similarities there, right? Like everybody has to understand the data. I have to understand the data. My team has to understand the data, and they have to help other people understand the data. We have to be super technical, from just troubleshooting to figuring out the right way to integrate a new system. And then it's all about figuring out how to communicate internally and help other people communicate internally. And I think the experience that I had on marketing teams, I was able to kind of bring that forward with me. But also, I was hire number 2 at Bloomscape, so I pretty much held almost every role at that company and helped build out like from the ground up, these teams. So all of that experience, I feel like, has enabled me and set me up to be really successful in this very like cross-functional role.
Yeah, I'm sure chief of staff is very similar in that you're reporting to the CEO. You have to deal with every function in the company. It's very similar to RevOps, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, definitely. Lots of overlap.
So, Kelsey, I want to ask you about something that you said to me in our last conversation. It's around this whole idea of challenges that you experience when you transition out of scrappy startup mode and you start to become a more mature growth company. You said that there's an urge to be the only one at the company who knows how to do X, Y, Z in a system or understands certain systems, and you like kind of holding on to that default executor role. Like, you're the only person that knows how to do something. Somebody has to go through you. Tell me, where have you seen this happen, and why do you so strongly believe that this is a big thing to watch out for as you transition out of startup mode?
Yeah, I think there's a lot to unpack there. So, as someone who has been that person, right, who's worn all the hats, has had to learn how to do all the things, it's a really hard transition to start letting that stuff go. So, going from hire number 2 at Bloomscape to when I left, there was over 100 people. I had to leave a lot of stuff behind in order for me to push my value forward, to grow with the company, but also so we could scale. And what I learned is that, yeah, it was a lot of times a lot easier for me to just like, okay, I'm just going to go and fix this thing because I know where this is, or I'm just going to deal with this because I know what it is and I don't have time to talk to anybody about it. But what I quickly realized is that I was burning myself out. B, I was not really setting anybody else up to be successful managing and taking over that kind of stuff if I was always just going to be the default person to do it. And C, I was also not making space for anybody to like bring new ideas or step up and kind of make it better than what I could do, with like 1/10 of my brain dedicated to it, right? So those were hard lessons for me personally, and but good lessons. And I kind of got myself out of that rut by really treating it more like, okay, how do I share this knowledge? How do I give this person that is going to be backfilling this part of my role and become like, Kelsey times 100 because they're going to be dedicated to it versus me who just had to like carve out time to just take care of it. How do I set them up to be successful? Help them understand what I was doing and why, where the pitfalls are, and where we could be going with it, and then let them fly. And a lot of that was super hard for me because a lot of those things at Bloomscape I had built. They were like my babies, and I was trying to give them to somebody else. But the only way...
What's an example?
So, like the entire marketing program, basically. So I started as our director of marketing and then moved into this chief of staff ops role. Mm-hmm. And in order to do that, I had to figure out how to hand off an entire team that I had built. I also did that with customer support. I did that with like e-com ops. So it was like all these chunks of the company that I had kind of held. I had to sort of break bits and pieces of me off and let somebody else own them. And I really got on this mission of just like documentation and training and enablement and spending a lot of time kind of up front getting someone really comfortable and set up to be successful, and then just being like, okay, you're ready. I am going to trust that you have this, and I'm moving on to this next thing, and kind of compartmentalizing and going forward. And coming to PetDesk, it's a pretty special place, actually. There's a lot of people, when I got here, had been at the company for like 5 or 6 years, which is kind of crazy for a startup. And wow. A lot of them, they were like comrades in arms, right? They had been down in the trenches with each other and had built all these systems and had gone through all this growth and all this change. But there were a lot of people who were like just the single source of truth for how systems were integrated, or even like bigger things like the customer journey, like that just lived in somebody's head. So there wasn't a lot of... There was documentation, but it wasn't sort of like... It was a lot of how-to, not of the why this. And one of the things that happens as a startup kind of goes from, the 80 person to 120 is a lot of those original people kind of say, okay, this isn't for me anymore. I'm ready to move on. I'm ready to go kind of like spread my wings. And then you're just losing all of that historical knowledge. And you're kind of like left with a bunch of stuff to clean up, and you just aren't sure where to even start. So what I've been trying to do is really advocate for kind of just like making documentation a regular part of our practice. When we make a change, we make sure we document it. I spent a long time actually putting together a really big like data dictionary of all our Salesforce fields and the objects that they live on, their dependencies, and how they're mapped into our marketing automation platform. And then the other piece is just making sure that I'm having conversations about some of those like bigger things that I wouldn't know unless I asked. And as soon as that person isn't here anymore, nobody is going to know, and nobody's going to be able to ask anymore. So really trying to create this like environment of knowledge sharing and enablement. And that also serves that kind of that purpose that I was sort of telling you about with the vision for the team of like, I don't want RevOps to just be turned into just this like request team, I want it to be collaborative. Yeah. And they also need to be empowering the teams that are using their systems. A salesperson should understand Salesforce. They should be able to go and pull a simple report themselves. A marketing person should be able to go and build an email. Now, they might not be, I wouldn't want a salesperson necessarily creating a new field on an object in Salesforce, or we might need to have some governance as far as setting up like workflows or automations in HubSpot. But if someone's interested in learning that, let's figure out how to empower them and enable them to do that with the right amount of governance, rather than, us being the only people that can build a form. That's crazy.
Yeah, and that transparency definitely helps the end users of these tools definitely buy in to when you add a new field or you add a new validation field, and they're like, why do we need to do that to get, to convert this lead to an op? It's like, well, this is what we're using the data for. And so you get a lot more buy-in and process adherence when you open things up, right?
Yeah, and I think that in my experience, when you kind of show somebody the potential of a tool and help them not be afraid of it, they get really excited about it and get really invested in it. We actually just did a little mini training with our customer success team to show them how to pull basic reports in Salesforce themselves, because they've got a lot of questions that are relatively simple to answer, but they just didn't even know how to approach the tool yet. And now that we've shown them how to do that, they're going like hog wild in the system and are really enthusiastic about it. And kind of to your point, I think they have a much better understanding of why we ask to capture certain types of information within their process.
Definitely. One of the things that it strikes me that you guys are at between 100 and 150 employees.
Mm-hmm.
So I've had some people on the podcast who are, they're just stepping into a RevOps role, or they're a chief revenue officer at a $100 million company, at a Series D, Series E company, and they're just now coming in and putting in data dictionary, customer journey maps, rich, rigorous documentation, BI, all the data infrastructure that companies know that they need to scale, but they're doing it when they're, pretty far down the road. Well, I'm curious how you anticipate, you're doing, and you're understanding that, we need to treat our data with great sanctity. We need to treat it strategic like it is. And it's cool to see at a company of your size, because I think it's rare. But I'm curious how you think it's going to impact PetDesk and what it's going to enable you guys to do a lot earlier than other companies who are still struggling because their Salesforce data is garbage, and they're going through they don't have buy-in on from the go-to-market team on how to use the systems, and all these things people struggle with. So what are you anticipating seeing now that you're tackling this stuff so early?
I think we're going to be able to be a lot smarter. It's taken a while. It's been a lot of work and a lot of hard, foundational, tedious cleanup stuff. A lot of me trying to figure out the data structure by trying to create board reports and do this ICP segmentation and stuff. So this year has really been foundational, and I knew it would be. But to me, my approach is always trying to balance those kind of long-term, bigger projects that are going to eventually set us up on a path to really be able to grow and scale and use the tools and get more out of the data that we're collecting every single day, with the short quick wins, right? And there were a couple of short quick wins and a couple of pain points that we were able to kind of just okay, let's take care of this.
Like what?
I've been very like what? So I think the first one that I implemented was actually an approval step within Salesforce before a contract got pushed over into Zora. And the issue is it's complex putting together our quotes, and there's quite a bit of nuance there. And once it's pushed from Salesforce into Zora, the only way to take care of it is if you delete it, which then means that everybody has to go and do everything again. And it was causing a lot of data mistakes with very important numbers like ARR and churn numbers and stuff like that. But it was also wasting everybody's times, from our salespeople to the RevOps people. So I was like, this is really silly. Let's fix it. This is a place where we should have some governance. And I think if we add just like a light layer and make sure that we're prioritizing it in our day to not slow down our sales velocity, we'll see a benefit from that. And I think it was one of the very first projects that I did. We wrote out a process, we got agreement on the sales team and the CS team. We figured out a cadence of like we just kind of grab and take what we can as the approval requests come through. And it's like it just works now. And it's really, really improved our data hygiene, and it's just saved everybody so much time. The other big one that wasn't a small thing ended up being a big thing, but I did implement a new MA platform relatively quickly when I got here too. But I think HubSpot. We switched from Pardot to HubSpot. My approach actually with that implementation has been kind of my approach here too, is like, let's focus on just putting in a strong foundation. Let's make sure that the data architecture is solid and makes sense. Let's make sure that we don't have big gaps in our process right now. Let's make sure that we have a customer journey, that we understand the potential value and figure out a way to like do segmentation. Let's make sure we're all using the same numbers and understand the numbers that we're looking at when we're reporting things, and that we have a place where we can go from there. And I think because we're taking the time right now, and because there's just been so much support for that type of work and space to be able to do it, because it does take a lot of time, next year and like in the future, we're going to be able to just like blast off because we have all this built out already. It's not going to get in the way of these things. And I think it's for those bigger companies, I've worked at those bigger companies that have like just junk everywhere and like no communication compliance. They've been blacklisted and like all this crazy stuff. And you're going through millions and millions lines of data to try to figure out where discrepancies are, and it's a nightmare. And it unfortunately gets to a point where everybody just starts doing something manually and nobody cares anymore, until you have to, and then usually at that point it's too late. So I'm hoping that we're ahead of the game and that we'll be able to be proactive with the changes that we're making so they won't get in our way.
Yeah, you're turning your go-to-market data into a competitive advantage instead of a risk or an inhibitor to growth,
Yeah, that's right.
So, Kelsey, your inbound marketing background has really informed a major strategic project that you're working on right now. But by the way, you've accomplished a lot since starting in April 2021. And we're now recording this in October, just for reference. It's 6 months, and she's talking about all the stuff she's gotten done. But so your inbound background has really informed a big project you're working on related to ICP segmentation, customer journeys. I think this is super interesting. Wondered if you could share it with our audience here.
Yeah. So when I was in marketing, I was always naturally a like full funnel marketer. I kind of started off in graphic design and like kind of more traditional awareness marketing and event marketing, and then was really lucky to work with people who were kind of at the cutting edge of behavioral marketing and marketing automation. And I was like, oh yeah, this is awesome, and really fell in love with that idea that you could like that interactions could become a conversation where you weren't just speaking to a potential customer, but by them choosing to view this blog post or clicking on this link or liking this ad, that you could glean something about them, and then help the conversation continue in a way that felt more natural and in the end was going to be less annoying for them and better for your business too. And that was just like magical to me. And I think where the desire to not just like leave it at, MQL and let it go was that when you start to really think about personalization at scale and you start to understand like all this data that can be all this behavioral data that can be leveraged and combined to help inform like personas and profile alignment and motivations, and like sales stage, like are they in awareness, are they in consideration? When I started to realize that, I was like, wait, like this shouldn't just stop at marketing. Sales should have this, our account manager should have this, product should have this. And I really, like, at my first SaaS startup role, I really got like on like a kick of just trying to evangelize the information that I was able to get, like that I had access to across the company. And what that's kind of led me down is this push for creating like a customer journey that aligns to a content strategy. So, I'm a big believer that every piece of content that you create should be telling you something about the person who would interact with it. And the only way to make that happen is if you have a clear understanding of the personas that you're going after. You have a clear understanding of what the kind of like motivations and pain points and kind of like roadblocks are for each persona at the different kind of stages of the customer journey. And then you can start to create content that's like tailored right to them, right? And if someone happens upon, and then it gets multiple lives too, because if someone happens to find it like through organic search or exploring your website, you get to you understand something about them right off the bat, where if you hadn't been kind of targeting who you're trying to talk to, you wouldn't. But you can also then use it in nurturing campaigns. You can use that information to help create sales playbooks and pass that along to the sales team. And then that started kind of leading me down this journey of like, okay, well, if we have that kind of at the customer marketing side, how does that roll up to how we're setting goals? How does that roll up to how we're measuring performance? How does that roll up to the objectives and the metrics that we're trying to achieve as a company and as a team? And what does that look like against the customer journey? So I came up with this thing that is like customer journey combined with like a business map that sort of brings together this idea of everything being aligned to the customer journey. We should always be thinking about our customers and where they are and trying to meet them where they are and help kind of proactively addressing what they're looking for or what they're nervous about. But we should also be really clear about what we're trying to achieve at each stage of this. And like that means overall, right? But also on each team. And when you kind of can start to structure it this way, I haven't completed it yet, but it's in progress, and it's really going to be a great tool for us to be able to set smart goals, where we're not just like measuring things for the sake of measuring them, but we're really focused on the things that are going to have the biggest impact on our business and the biggest impact for our customer and are directly aligned to their goals at that time too.
Wow, quite an undertaking.
Yeah.
So for somebody who is just kind of, they're hearing this for the first time, they understand in general the concepts you're talking about, but they want to take action. They want to start mapping their content strategy, their customers' buying journey. Where do you think they should start, and maybe aligned with that question, where is the highest impact do you think somebody can see? Do you think they should start top of the funnel? Do you think they should start bottom of the funnel? Where should they start?
Well, highest impact kind of is going to depend on their business, because it really depends on the market that they're in and where they are as far as like in their kind of trajectory. A biggest impact for a startup that hasn't found product market fit is not going to be the same for a startup that's getting ready to scale, right? So I think there's no one size fits all there, but I really would advocate for creating data-driven combined with qualitative personas. And you don't need everything, just a couple. Just know who your customers are. Talk to some customers. Try to see if you can glean like data insights that can tell you that could be like an indicator of who they are and where they are in their journey. And then figure out what the putting together a customer journey can be super complicated, or you can simplify it. And to start, I would say focus on one or two very clear motivations for the customer at that stage. Then focus on one or two pain points that they're either trying to solve, or more impactfully, that they're trying to that are going to become roadblocks from them moving forward along their journey. And those transition points of awareness to consideration, consideration to decision are the highest impact that you can have within that kind of flow, because that's where people get stuck. And if you can help someone get stuck, you're going to start to see more velocity and help people move more quickly through that journey. That's on the customer side. On the business side, there's this incredible book. I forget the name of the author, but it's called Cracking the Sales Management Code. And it does a fantastic, even if you're not a salesperson, it does a fantastic job of helping to break down how to align an initiative to an objective to KPIs that's very clear, very formulaic, and it's going to really be beneficial in helping you focus on the right things for your business and for your teams.
Just took a note down, Cracking the Sales Management Code. We'll have to check that out. So, Kelsey, help bring this, the whole project you're working on to life a little bit, if you would, as much as you're comfortable. What's an example of some content that you're creating, and so you talked about content creation and mapping that to the customer journey, whether it's awareness, consideration, decision. That all makes sense. That's inbound marketing, blocking and tackling conceptually, but you're actually acting on it. So help, tell us about some of the offers you're putting out, or some of the content and the mediums you're using, and how it's matching up with the customer journey that people take at PetDesk, if you would, whatever you feel comfortable sharing.
Yeah, so we're kind of midway through this project at PetDesk, and for us, it's actually going to be how do we repurpose a lot of the content that we already have to help, and where can we kind of fill the gaps of for content for each of these kind of personas within the customer journey. But I can give you kind of a more tangible example that I actually used at Bloomscape on the D2C side when I did this, which was that, so Bloomscape is houseplant delivery. So it's buying houseplants online. And when I was kind of going through the work of trying to put together these personas and map this customer journey, one of the biggest things that came up is that people felt super uncomfortable that they were buying a plant because they were pretty sure they were going to kill it. Everybody who talks to me about plants says oh, well, I can't keep a plant alive. That's all I heard. And I was like, okay, well, that's my number one thing then. I want to show them at every stage throughout the journey how we are going to help them become awesome plant people. And that really became core to our business as we grew. It started off with very, putting kind of expertise up front and center. We had a really strong return policy. If, your plant died and within 30 days, we guaranteed it and would send you a new one. We, off the bat, had started having really detailed care instructions, followed up with kind of what does it mean if my plant has brown spots and all of this kind of stuff, and built all out this content that kind of went through the kind of life cycle of becoming a plant parent, and what it ended up being is by the time someone had bought many plants from us, we could send them more detailed information about how to propagate and how to repot, and timing that with when they actually bought their plant, so they were doing it at the right time. And when we added in care products, we were able to kind of tailor it to the person's skills, the assumed skill set, but also where they were with their plant family too. And all of that came from
really
that
cool
work.
That's awesome. Well, I can't wait to hear how it turns out at PetDesk. I know you said you're midway through the strategizing process, but I can't wait to hear how it turns out. Last thing I want to ask you, Kelsey, is about the perfect ops team. You've hinted at it. You hinted at it a little bit. So you talked earlier about having a centralized RevOps team with advocates in CS, sales, and marketing. You also talked about having somebody who's totally dedicated to data governance. I also noticed that you have a RevOps analyst on your team, Kelsey. So tell me about the, beyond those roles, tell me about the perfect ops team that you're trying to build, and what other components you see coming
Yeah.
soon.
I mean, I definitely think that an additional analyst would probably be needed in down the line in a couple years. I would also
For what?
say just because there's so much data. We have business data and we have product data, and we want to be smart about how we're starting to bring that together. Also, as we grow, we'll be expanding, and with that becomes even more complexities. So I think just having, and that's the work that takes the longest, right? There's a ton, it's time consuming and it's tedious, and you need somebody who knows it in and out. So having an extra person helping with that, I think would really help round out the team as well. And then eventually probably having like a full stack engineer or like a systems architect that could really take over the development and the integrate, like strengthening the integrations as our tech stack grows. So right now I'm kind of that person. I'm very comfortable in systems, and I'm very technical. So I sort of took on the admin responsibilities, and my desire is to have those kind of vertical roles really be the owner admins of the suite of the tools that are specific to their team. So our marketing ops person, who just started with us, he'll be our owner admin for HubSpot, which means he's and all the other marketing suite of tools. So he'll be empowered and responsible for selecting new tools and taking tools out of that stack, making sure that they're integrated correctly, that data is flowing accurately, making improvements kind of behind the scenes, always thinking about ways to optimize it, but also like being a true owner and helping with adoption, helping with that enablement, empowerment, helping the team dream a little bit bigger with what they're trying to do, and showing them cool things and getting their imaginations going with it. But I do see a day where, depending on how complex the tech stack gets, that having kind of like that cross-functional role that can really make sure and support all the connectivity, and get a little bit deeper with the automations and development, especially within Salesforce, would be great.
That sounds like a good plan, but you've already got a solid team to begin with. So
Yeah.
and a great leader. So last question: who should RevOps report to?
So this is a tricky one. So I actually started off reporting into operations. That was data, RevOps, and PMO. And then we kind of made the decision that it would make more sense for RevOps to actually be part of the business-facing side of the company, reporting into the CEO, since so much of our time is spent with those teams and spent on, executive level reporting and, business reporting and analysis. So that's where we are today. I don't know if I can give you like a perfect answer for it, but I would say that it should definitely not be reporting into one of the vertical functions. So it should not report to a VP of sales. It should not report to a director of marketing. It should not be reporting to a VP of customer success, unless you have like customer experience as an umbrella. Because again, I think the real strength of RevOps, at least what it's been for me at PetDesk is that I am able to be, my guiding light is what's best for PetDesk and what's best for our customers. And that really, that being agnostic to the team dynamics and the team, the kind of the team level KPIs and performance metrics and stuff like that really helps me make sure that we're focusing on the right things and that we're doing the right things for the business in the long term and overall. And I think that that's what's most important.
I love it. I happen to believe, after talking to so many RevOps people on this podcast, that they're forging a new path to the CEO seat. That because you have such a broad view, you work with finance, you work with sales and marketing, you work with customer support, you're working with the same people the CEO is. You understand the executive level decisions they need to make because you're the one providing the data and reporting and the insights up. And so I think it's a path that's going to be more and more common in the years to come, especially in SaaS and tech.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing, along with the rise of RevOps, we're also seeing a rise of the CRO and the CCO, the Chief Customer Officer, or the Chief Experience Officer, CXO. I've also seen, and I think there's a lot of similarities there, from a way you're thinking about things. That's going to be really interesting too.
Yeah. Absolutely. You're not focused on your own function. You see the whole end-to-end engine, and you care about optimizing the whole thing instead of just arguing for more budget for this marketing program or
exactly
more, headcount over here. For sure. Kelsey, you've been with us for almost an hour now. Thanks so much for your time and for sharing your knowledge with all of us. I hope to catch up with you down the road. Best of luck as you continue to build on this really strong foundation that you've put in place at PetDesk. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much.